You know that feeling you get when you're home alone and the house settles? That sudden, sharp crack of floorboards or the low groan of the foundation that makes you hold your breath for just a second. We all tell ourselves the same lie. It's just the house. It's just the wood expanding. It's just the wind. I told myself that lie for 6 months. I repeated it like a mantra until the words lost all meaning. But the thing about lies is that they don't change the truth. They just delay the moment you have to face it. My name isn't important, but the house is everything. It was a beautiful, 3-story Victorian on the outskirts of a small town in western Massachusetts, the kind of place that looks charming in a real estate brochure, but feels cavernous when you're the only soul inside. I thought I had found my sanctuary. I thought I had finally found a place where I could be truly alone. I didn't realize that alone is a luxury I had lost the moment I signed the deed. I didn't realize that the sounds in the walls weren't the house breathing. They were someone else's breath, synchronized with mine, waiting for me to close my eyes. I moved into the house on a Tuesday in late October. The air was already turning brittle, the kind of New England cold that seems to seep into your marrow before the first frost even hits. I'm a freelance architectural consultant, which basically means I spend my life looking at blueprints, calculating structural integrity, and working from a laptop in whatever corner of a room has the best light. This house was supposed to be my masterpiece project. It was old, built in 1894, and had that heavy, solemn dignity that modern builds just can't replicate. Tall windows, dark mahogany trim, and a maze of service corridors and back staircases that were common for the era. For the first few weeks, I was in heaven. My routine was rhythmic and solitary. I'd wake up at 6:00 a.m., the house still shrouded in that blue, pre-dawn mist that clung to the oak trees outside. I'd make a pot of coffee, the smell of roasted beans the only thing filling the massive kitchen. I'd spend the morning working in the study on the second floor, then the afternoon stripping wallpaper or sanding down the original floorboards. By 8:00 p.m., the sun was long gone, and the house would descend into a profound, heavy silence. That's the thing about rural Massachusetts. Once the crickets stop, the silence is so thick you can almost hear your own heartbeat. It started small, so small that I feel foolish even mentioning it now. About 3 weeks in, I noticed my keys weren't where I'd left them. I'm a creature of habit, obsessive even. I always put my keys in the small porcelain bowl on the entryway table. One morning, they were on the kitchen counter, tucked behind the toaster. I frowned, cold coffee in hand, trying to remember if I'd walked into the kitchen with them. I figured I was just tired. The renovation was taxing, and I was likely on autopilot. Then it was the thermostat. I liked the house cold at night, 62 degrees. I'd wake up and the dial would be turned to 68, just enough to be noticeable, not enough to be alarming. I blamed the old wiring. I told myself the analog dial was slipping. I told myself a dozen different versions of it's fine. But then came the sounds. The first time I heard it was a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after I moved in. I was laying in bed, the sheets pulled up to my chin, watching the shadows of the tree branches dance across the ceiling. It was around 2:15 a.m. The house was dead quiet, and then from the wall directly behind my headboard, I heard a slide. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't the sharp snap of wood contracting. It was the sound of something heavy and soft dragging across a flat surface. SSSSSSS thump. It froze, my heart didn't race, it stopped. I listened, my ears straining so hard they began to ring. Silence followed, a long, agonizing minute of nothing. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and stared at the wall. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern I hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. It looked solid. I knocked on it. Thud, thud, thud. Solid plaster and lath. Behind that wall was the main hallway, but the sound hadn't come from the hallway. It had come from inside the structure. Mice, I whispered into the empty room. Or squirrels, the attic must have a gap. But deep down, I knew what a squirrel sounded like. A squirrel is erratic, fast, and light. This had been deliberate. This had weight. Over the next 2 weeks, the weight became more apparent. I began to notice a smell, It wasn't the smell of rot or something dead in the vents. It was human. The faint, metallic scent of unwashed skin and old, stale air. It would drift out of the floor vents in the study or linger in the back of the pantry. I bought industrial-strength air fresheners, thinking maybe the previous owners had been hoarders and the scent was trapped in the floorboards. I scrubbed every inch of that house with bleach until my eyes burned, but the smell remained, a ghostly passenger in the air I breathed. The incidents began to escalate. I'd find a kitchen cabinet open that I knew I'd closed. I'd find the shower curtain pulled back when I always left it closed to dry. One evening, I came home from the grocery store and found a single chair from the dining room moved into the center of the kitchen. It was perfectly centered under the light fixture, facing the door I walked through. I stood there, bags of groceries in my arms, staring at that chair. My hands started to shake. I didn't call the police. What would I say? "Officer, someone moved my chair." They'd think I was a lunatic. I took a deep breath, moved the chair back, and checked every lock in the house. The deadbolts were thrown. The windows were latched. The basement door was barred from the inside. There was no way in. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I stayed on the sofa in the living room with a heavy mag light and a kitchen knife on the coffee table. I left the lights on. Around 3:30 a.m., just as I was drifting into a shallow, fitful doze, I heard it again. It started in the ceiling above me. Step, step, pause. Then, a slow, rhythmic scraping like a heel being dragged across the floorboards of the second floor. It moved from the center of the house toward the master bedroom. I followed it with my eyes, my head tilting back, watching the plaster as if I could see through it. It stopped directly over where my bed would be. Then, I heard a sound that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It was a soft, low whistle, just 3 notes, do-re-mi. It was coming from the vents. I bolted up the stairs, the knife held out in front of me like a talisman. I slammed open the bedroom door and flicked the switch. The room was empty. The bed was made. The window was locked. But the smell of stale skin was so thick in the room it was like a physical wall. I ran to the floor vent near the window and peered down through the metal slats. Darkness. Total, consuming darkness. I unscrewed the vent cover with trembling fingers, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I shone the mag light down into the galvanized steel duct. There was nothing there, just dust and the cold metal of the house's lungs. But as I pulled my head back, I saw something caught on the edge of the screw hole. A small, thin thread of fabric. I picked it up. It was a dark, charcoal gray wool. I didn't own anything in that color or material. I held it up to the light, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a haunting. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was in here. The next day, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. The house felt different now. Every corner felt like an eye. Every shadow felt like a presence. I spent the morning in the basement tracing the HVAC lines and the plumbing stacks. I'm an architect. I know how houses are built. I know where the dead spaces are. In these old Victorians, there are often voids, spaces between the interior walls and the exterior brick, or areas under the eaves that were never finished. I found the first access point behind the water heater, a small, rectangular panel that had been painted over so many times it was almost invisible. I pried it open with a crowbar. It led to a narrow crawl space that ran the length of the foundation. I crawled in with my flashlight, the dust choking me. It was empty, save for some old newspapers from the 1940s and a few rusted tin cans. I felt a wave of relief, followed by a crushing sense of dread. If they weren't in the basement, they were higher up. I spent the afternoon checking the attic. The attic was a vast, open space with peaked ceilings and dormer windows. It was cold and drafty, but there was nowhere to hide. I checked the floorboards for loose panels, but everything was solid. I sat down on an old trunk, my head in my hands. I was losing my mind. I was a professional, a rational man, and I was hunting ghosts in the walls of a house I had spent my life savings on. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe I was having a breakdown. I decided I would leave the next morning. I'd stay at a motel in town, call a private investigator, and have them sweep the place. I just needed one night of peace. That night the snow began to fall. Not a light dusting, but a heavy, wet New England blizzard that turned the world outside into a white blur. The wind howled through the eaves, making the house moan and shudder. It was the kind of night where you feel every inch of your isolation. I stayed in the living room again, the fireplace roaring. I had the TV on, the volume low, just for the comfort of human voices. Around midnight, the power flickered. The TV died, the lights hummed and vanished, and the house was plunged into a blackness so total it felt heavy. The only light came from the dying embers in the hearth, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. I sat right still. In the silence of the power outage, the house became a different beast. I could hear the snow hitting the windows, a soft, persistent tick-tick-tick. I could hear the wind whistling through the chimney. And then I heard the sound that broke me. It was a cough. A dry, hacking human cough. It came from the wall directly to my left. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I sat there in the dark, my eyes wide, staring at the wall. The cough happened again, muffled but unmistakable. It was followed by the sound of someone shifting their weight, the creak of a hidden board, the rustle of fabric against wood. The sound wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the inside of the wall. The living room had a large, ornate fireplace with a massive oak mantel. Flanking the fireplace were two built-in bookshelves that reached all the way to the ceiling. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked over to the left bookshelf. I began pulling books off the shelves, throwing them onto the floor in a frantic, desperate heap. Behind the third shelf, about 4 feet off the ground, I saw it. A knot in the wood, but it wasn't a knot. It was a hole, no bigger than a penny, drilled perfectly through the back of the shelf and the plaster behind it. I grabbed my flashlight and pressed the lens against the hole. I saw a space, a narrow, vertical shaft that I hadn't seen on any of the blueprints. It was a chimney for the old gas lighting lines that had been long since disconnected. It ran from the basement all the way to the attic, tucked between the living room and the kitchen. And in that space, I saw a face. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man. He was incredibly thin, his skin a pale, waxy yellow from a lack of sunlight. His hair was long, matted, and gray, hanging in greasy clumps over his forehead. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through another hole further down into the kitchen. He was wearing a tattered gray sweater, the same charcoal wool I'd found in the vent. I backed away, a silent scream caught in my throat. I tripped over the pile of books, crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. The man in the wall froze. I saw his eye, a dull, watery blue shift. He pressed his face against the hole I was looking through. He wasn't scared. He wasn't surprised. He just stared. Then he began to laugh. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a wet, wheezing sound that wheezed through the hole and into the room. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't grab my keys. I ran for the front door, my socks sliding on the hardwood. I grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't budge. I looked down. The deadbolt was thrown. I turned it, but it just spun in the housing. The mechanism had been jammed from the inside. I ran to the kitchen door. Jammed. The windows in the living room, nailed shut from the outside. I hadn't noticed. How had I not noticed? He must have done it while I was sleeping, or while I was in the basement, or while I was out getting groceries. He had been preparing. He had been turning my sanctuary into a cage. I stood in the center of the kitchen, the only light coming from the snow-reflected moon through the windows. My breath was coming in short, jagged bursts. I could hear him now. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was moving. I heard him sliding down the shaft, his feet hitting the floorboards of the basement with a heavy thud. Then, the sound of the basement door, the one I had barred from the inside, creaking open. He hadn't been trapped in the walls. The walls were just his highway. He owned the house. I was just the guest who had stayed too long. I grabbed the heaviest knife from the butcher block, a long, serrated bread knife. It felt pathetic in my hand. I backed into the corner of the kitchen where the shadows were deepest. I waited. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. They came up the basement stairs. 1, 2, 3. The door to the kitchen swung open. He stood in the doorway, framed by the darkness of the hallway. He was smaller than I'd imagined, hunched over, his arms unnaturally long for his frame. He was barefoot, his feet calloused and blackened with dirt. He stood there for a long time, just breathing. The smell, that metallic, stale scent, was overwhelming now. "You move the chair," he said. His voice was a dry rasp like sandpaper on stone. He hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "I like the chair in the kitchen. It has the best view." "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. My voice sounded small and foreign to my ears. "I live here," he said simply. He took a step into the kitchen. "I've always lived here, before you, before the ones before you. I like the way you sand the floors. It makes them smooth on my feet." "Get out," I said, holding the knife out. "Get out or I'll kill you." He didn't stop. He didn't even look at the knife. He looked at me with those watery blue eyes, a strange, hollow pity in them. "You thigh. NK, this is your house. Because you have a piece of paper. I know the heartbeat of this house. I know where the floorboards groan. I know where the air is coldest. I am the house." He took another step. I lunged forward, not to kill him, but to get past him, to get to the hallway, to the back stairs, anywhere but this corner. He moved with a terrifying, fluid speed. He didn't strike me. He just shifted, his body blocking the exit like a shadow. "You're tired," he whispered. "I've watched you sleep. You toss and turn. You worry about the walls. You shouldn't worry about the walls. The walls are safe. It's the open spaces you should fear." I swung the knife. It caught the sleeve of his gray sweater, tearing the wool. He didn't flinch. He grabbed my wrist with a hand that felt like a cold iron vise. His strength was immense, the kind of wiry, desperate strength of a man who has lived on nothing but spite and shadows for years. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled of copper and old grease. "I'm going to show you," he whispered. "I'm going to show you where I stay. It's quiet there. No wind, no snow, just the pulse of the wood." He began to drag me toward the pantry. I fought him, kicking, biting, screaming until my throat was raw, but he was like a force of nature. He kicked open the pantry door and pulled aside a heavy shelf I'd thought was bolted to the wall. Behind it was a dark, narrow opening, a hole cut into the lath and plaster, leading into the void behind the kitchen. "No," I shrieked. "No, please." He pushed me toward the hole. I clawed at the door frame, my fingernails splintering against the wood. The darkness of that hole was absolute. It wasn't just a physical space. It was a maw, a throat waiting to swallow me whole. As he shoved me closer, my hand found something on the pantry floor, a heavy gallon jug of vinegar I'd bought for cleaning. I swung it with every ounce of strength I had left. It connected with the side of his head with a wet, heavy crack. He grunted and his grip loosened for a split second. I didn't wait. I shoved him with all my weight, pushing him toward the hole he tried to force me into. He stumbled, his bare feet slipping on the spilled vinegar, and he vanished into the darkness of the wall. I didn't stay to see if he got up. I didn't stay to hear him scream. I ran to the living room, grabbed the heavy oak chair, and smashed the living room window. The glass shattered, the cold night air rushing in like a reprieve. I dove through the broken pane, the jagged glass tearing at my skin, and landed in the deep, freezing snow. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, nearly a mile away. My feet were numb, my chest was burning, and my blood was hot against the cold snow. I flagged down a snowplow, the driver looking at me like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. The police arrived an hour later. They searched the house from top to bottom. They found the holes. They found the shaft behind the bookshelf. They found the nest in the crawlspace, a disgusting pile of stolen blankets, half-eaten cans of food I didn't even remember buying, and hundreds of photographs of me. Some were taken while I was working in the study. Some were taken while I was eating dinner. And dozens were taken while I was asleep, the camera lens pressed against the floor vents or the peepholes in the walls. But they didn't find him. They found the gray sweater, snagged on a nail inside the wall cavity behind the pantry. They found a trail of blood leading down into the basement and into the old sewer line that had been bypassed decades ago. But the man who knew my heartbeat, was gone. I never went back to that house. I sold it at a massive loss, the deed passing to a developer who tore it down to build a row of modern townhomes. I moved to a high-rise apartment in the city. Steel, concrete, glass, no voids, no crawl spaces, no walls made of plaster and lath. But the damage was done. It's been 2 years and I still don't sleep in the dark. I have cameras in every room. Their blue power lights the only stars in my private universe. I check the locks 4, 5, 6 times a night. My neighbors think I'm eccentric. My friends stopped calling long ago. The horror isn't in what he did to me. He didn't even truly hurt me physically. The horror is what he took. He took the concept of safety. He took the sanctity of the home. I'll be sitting in my living room, the city lights humming outside, and I'll hear it. A soft thump from the ceiling, a faint slide from the closet door. My mind knows it's the neighbor upstairs or the building's HVAC system. My mind knows I'm in a concrete box 60 feet in the air. But my body remembers. My ears strain for those 3 whistled notes. My skin crawls with the phantom sensation of a watery blue eye watching me through a hole I haven't found yet. Because the truth I learned in that house in Massachusetts is a truth you can't unlearn. You thigh. NK, you're alone right now. You're listening to this or you're reading this and you're sure of the space around you. You checked the door. You know the layout of your room. But houses have secrets. Walls have voids. And sometimes the settling sounds you hear at 3:00 a.m. aren't the wood expanding. It's him. It's someone like him. Someone who has learned to breathe when you breathe. Someone who has learned to move when you move. Someone who is, at this very moment, waiting for you to close your eyes so they can finally come out of the dark and sit in the chair they moved while you were at work. I thought someone was living in my walls. I was right. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake every single night until the sun comes up. I don't think he stayed in Massachusetts. I think he followed the smell of my fear. Sometimes when the apartment is very, very quiet, I smell it, just for a second. The faint, metallic scent of unwashed skin and stale air. It drifts out of the AC vent in my bedroom. And then from the other side of the wall, right behind my headboard, I hear a cough. It's dry, it's hacking, it's human. And then a soft, low whistle, "Dearie me." I haven't closed my eyes in 3 days, and I don't think I ever will again. The isolation of my new life in the city was supposed to be a shield, but it has become a different kind of prison. In the Victorian house, the threat was tangible, a man in the wood, a physical presence I could fight. Here, in the heart of a bustling metropolis, the threat has become psychological, a specter that lives in the gaps of my own sanity. Or so I tell myself. The problem is that the evidence keeps mounting, the kind of subtle, realistic evidence that makes you question the very fabric of your reality. Take the elevators, for instance. My apartment is on the 14th floor. It's a secure building, key fob access only, cameras in the lobby, a doorman who greets me by name. But several times now, I've stepped into the elevator late at night, and the smell is there. That heavy, damp, organic odor that doesn't belong in a sanitized, stainless steel box. It's like someone has been standing in the corner of the elevator for hours, just waiting. I've asked the doorman, Marcus, if anyone else has complained about the smell or if there's been any unauthorized access. He just looks at me with that mixture of pity and professional detachment. "It's an old building, Mr. Henderson," he says. "The vents pull air from all over. Maybe it's just someone's cooking." But it isn't cooking. I know what I smell. I know the scent of the man who watched me sleep. The aftermath of the house wasn't just about moving. It was about the total erosion of my ability to trust my own senses. Every sound is a potential intrusion. If a bird hits the window, I'm up with a flashlight, checking the perimeter of my one-bedroom apartment. If the refrigerator cycles on with a particularly loud hum, my heart skips a beat. I've become an expert in the silence of my environment. I know the exact pitch of the city traffic 14 stories down. I know the rhythmic clicking of the radiator. Anything that falls outside that narrow band of normal sends me into a spiral of cold, paralyzing dread. I tried therapy, I really did. Dr. Aris was a kind woman with a soft voice and a clinical office that smelled like lavender, the polar opposite of the man in the walls. She told me I was suffering from a severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder. She said my brain was hypervigilant, stuck in a loop of survival mode. She gave me exercises to ground myself. Name 5 things you see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. The problem was the hearing. I hear the hum of your computer, I told her during our last session. I hear the clock on the wall, and I hear someone shifting their weight in the closet behind you. She turned around, of course. She opened the closet. It was full of files and extra coats, empty. She looked back at me, her expression softening into that look, the one people give you when they think you're broken. The mind is a powerful thing, she said. It wants to protect you, so it creates threats where there are none. I didn't go back after that. She didn't understand. It's not that my mind is creating threats. It's that the threat has learned how to hide in the static of the world. I've started setting traps again, but modern ones. I bought a thermal imaging camera, the kind contractors use to find heat leaks in walls. I spend my nights panning it across the drywall of my apartment. Mostly, it's just the orange glow of the heating pipes or the cool blue of the exterior windows. But once, just once, I saw a shape. It was 4:00 a.m. I was scanning the wall that separates my bedroom from the hallway. A faint, blurry yellow bloom appeared on the screen. It was vertical, about 5 feet tall, and it was moving. It wasn't a pipe. It was a heat signature. It moved slowly, dragging itself along the interior of the wall toward the ceiling. I dropped the camera, the screen cracking against the floor. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just sat on the edge of my bed and watched the spot where the heat had been. The drywall looked perfect. Smooth, eggshell white paint. No holes, no vents, no way in. But I knew. He didn't need a way in. He was already there. He had become a part of the architecture of my life. I've begun to realize that he wasn't lying when he said he was the house. To him, the physical structures we build to keep the world out are just playgrounds. He doesn't see walls, he sees paths. He doesn't see locks, he sees puzzles. And he doesn't see me as a person anymore. I'm a tenant. I'm the thing that provides the heat, the food, and the pulse he needs to feel alive. The psychological toll is a slow, grinding attrition. I've lost weight. My hair is thinning. I look in the mirror and I see a ghost staring back, sunken eyes, pale skin. I'm becoming him. I'm becoming the thing that hides in the dark because the light is too honest, too revealing. Sometimes I find myself standing in front of the walls of my apartment, my ear pressed against the cold paint, just listening. I'm not listening for him to go away anymore. I'm listening for him to speak. I want to know why. Why me? Why that house? Why this life? But he never answers with words, just those 3 notes, do re mi. It's a taunt. It's a nursery rhyme from hell. It's his way of telling me that no matter where I go, no matter how high I climb or how many locks I turn, I am never truly alone. The most terrifying thought, the one that keeps me up even when the exhaustion feels like a physical weight on my chest, is the realization of how many people like him there might be. We walk through our lives, we buy our homes, we rent our apartments, and we assume that the space between the walls is empty. We assume that the darkness in the attic is just air. But what if it isn't? What if the housing crisis isn't about property values, but about the things that have lived in the shadows since the first timber was laid? What if every old house, every pre-war building, every high-rise has its own pulse? I've started looking at people differently on the street. I look for the thin ones, the pale ones, the ones with the charcoal gray wool sweaters and the watery blue eyes. I see them everywhere now. In the back of a bus, standing in the shadow of an alleyway, leaning against a brick wall in a way that makes it look like they're trying to merge with it. They're the silent ones, the ones who don't belong to the world of the sun. Last night I woke up and the smell was so strong it made me gag. It was metallic like blood but stale like an unventilated basement. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't reach for my phone. I just laid there staring at the ceiling. I heard a sound, not a whistle, not a cough. It was a whisper. It came from the pillow right next to my head. "You're finally beginning to understand," the voice said. It wasn't the rasp from before. It was smoother, almost like a sigh. "The walls aren't for keeping things out. They're for keeping the secret in." I didn't turn my head. I couldn't. My muscles were locked in a state of pure, primal terror. "And the secret is," the voice continued, the breath warm against my ear, "that you were never the one living here. You were just the one paying the rent." I felt a hand, cold, thin, and impossibly light, rest on my shoulder. It didn't squeeze. It just sat there, a claim of ownership. I stayed like that until the sun came up. When the first light of dawn hit the room, the hand was gone. The smell was gone. The voice was gone. But I found something on my bedside table. It was a small porcelain bowl. My porcelain bowl. The one I'd left in the entryway of the house in Massachusetts 2 years ago. The one I'd left behind when I ran into the snow. And inside the bowl was a single, charcoal gray wool thread. I'm sitting in my living room now, writing this. The sun is setting over the city and the shadows are starting to stretch across the floor. The doorman thinks I'm safe. The police think I'm crazy. The therapist thinks I'm traumatized. But I know the truth. I thought someone was living in my walls. I was right. But I was wrong about one thing. They aren't living in the walls to hide from me. They're living in the walls to wait for me. And I think the wait is almost over. I can hear the sliding sound now. It's not behind the bookshelf. It's not in the kitchen. It's directly beneath my feet, coming from the floorboards of the 14th floor. SSSSSSS thump. SSSSSSS thump. He's not in the walls anymore. He's in the foundation of everything I am, and there's nowhere left to run. The city outside is a forest of steel and glass, millions of rooms, millions of walls, and billions of secret spaces. I used to look at the skyline and see progress. Now I see a hive, a massive, looming hive of voids and SH. Ados, each one occupied by a silent, waxy-skinned tenant who knows the heartbeat of the person on the other side of the plaster. I've stopped fighting. I don't check the locks anymore. I don't pan the thermal camera. I just sit in the center of the room and wait for the whistle, because I realize now that he was right. I am tired. I am so tired of being the only one who knows. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe the only way to find peace is to stop being the tenant and start being the house. I can hear him breathing now. It's rhythmic, it's steady. It's synchronized perfectly with mine. If you're listening to this or reading this, do me a favor. Don't look at your walls. Don't knock on the plaster. And whatever you do, don't look down the vents. Just keep telling yourself the lie. It's just the house settling. It's just the wind. It's just you. But we both know that isn't true, don't we? Dury me.